Do you know where your fish is coming from? Hi, I'm Bernice Hunt, and I am a brain health specialist. I work with women just like you who are starting to notice a few memory challenges, and I help you to stay sharp so that as you age, you can still travel, have fun with your grandkids, and experience new adventures without missing a beat. As a public school teacher for over 30 years, I got used to checking my resources when I was teaching different things, and that became a very good habit that I retained when it comes to healthy eating. Now, did you catch my last video? A couple of weeks ago, it's been a couple of weeks, but a couple of weeks ago I did a video about the 4 fish that you should never eat. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at that, it's still on my YouTube channel or on my Facebook page, Keep Your Brain Sharp. You can find it on there. But today, I wanted to continue and finish up with that. And I wanted to dwell on the importance of knowing what fish that you could choose, and also knowing how important it is to know where those fish are coming from. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about today, because I'm not saying not to eat fish, because technically fish is an excellent brain food. You're getting your omega-3s, your protein, your lean protein, all of that good stuff, low unsaturated fat, all that good stuff for you. So it's a great brain protein, but I am saying that you need to be selective in the days that we're living in. You need to be finicky. You need to be picky when it comes to the fish that you would choose to eat. And I'm not talking about the taste. I'm talking about some other stuff. We're going to get into that, okay? Now, if your vision of someone going out to the water and casting that fishing rod and reeling in that fish, and that's the fish that's on your plate, think again. Because actually, up to 75% of the store-bought fish comes from a fish farm. A fish farm. It's called aquaculture. Aquaculture. Water farm. Okay, you know, agriculture is on the land. Aquaculture is water. A water farm. Okay, so that's where you're getting it from, up to 75% of what's in your stores. And that's not all. About 60% of that comes from other countries. So it's not, they didn't have that farm close to you. It's not a local farm. It's coming from other countries. According to their regulations, may not be what they are here. So those things you need to know. You need to be selective in your fish. Okay. Just like farming on land, when we start farming in water, there are some problems that can crop up. And we're going to talk a little bit about those problems later, but there's some things you should know, some challenges with aqua farming, okay, or aquaculture. All right, so let's first talk about your choices, though, because there are some choices that are better than others, all right? And you know, with me, I like to use acronyms. And so my acronym for this is SASH, S-A-S-H, SASH. And it stands for salmon, anchovies, sardines, and herring. So that's my acronym. Those are the safest, healthiest fish that you can eat once or twice a week. We can't go crazy on fish still, guys, because of all the stuff we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but those are the safest, healthiest fish. Now, I hear some of you saying, what about tuna? What about mackerel? What about trout? And okay, I hear you. And actually, some people do add those to the list, and you can add it to the list if you want. I personally choose not to, and I'll tell you why. Because there's a lot of exceptions with those fish, and I'm a simple person. I don't want to get it all complicated. And so it's just easy for me to just take them out of the equation versus remembering all the exceptions to that. For example, with tuna, the chunk light tuna that's in the can, that has a low level, relatively low level of mercury. So you can eat that once or twice a week kind of thing. But not the albacore, not the white tuna, not the yellowfin tuna. And in my brain, I don't know if I want to keep all that stuff up in there. It's just easy for me to just say, you know what? I better just go with sardines or salmon, okay? But if you want to do tuna, just know that there are exceptions and know what those exceptions are. Same thing with mackerel. There's a mackerel that you should never eat, and there's one that's perfectly safe to eat. We talked about on the last video that the king mackerel you should never, ever eat. But the Atlantic mackerel is safe. Once again, too complicated for me. I just say, you know what? I don't want to have to remember all that. I'm just not going to eat mackerel, okay? Okay. Same thing with trout. Trout from certain lakes are okay, but they say avoid eating trouts from these other lakes. You know, I just can't get with it. I just say I just won't do the trout and I'm fine. So I'll just stick with the SASH. I'll stick with the salmon and the anchovies and the sardines and the herring. Now, here's the thing with anchovies, though. If you have a blood pressure challenges, most of the anchovies you're going to find are going to be heavily salted. It's going to be high in sodium. So you may want to stay away from that if you don't want to do that high sodium thing, you know, if you have some blood pressure issues. So you may want to stay away from anchovies. But otherwise, the salmon and the sardines and the herring are fine. Now, if you want to remember all the exceptions for the mackerel and the tuna, you know, go ahead and do you. And your acronym changes to SMASHT. SMACHT. So you add the mackerel and you added the tuna and you added the trout. All right. So do you. So those are the choices that you should look to when you're talking about fish. Now, let's get on to the farming. Because like I said, up to 75% of that fish you're going to be buying or the fish you're going to be finding in your restaurant is farmed fish. Now, there is potential in farm fish, having fish farms. We're going to talk about that. But you need to know what the challenges are, too, so you can make better selections. Here's the deal. Salmon, which, as you know, is a popular fish, is one of the most popular fish worldwide, has some differences in the kinds of salmon, okay? One of the problems with salmon is that 2 of the common salmon are on the endangered species list. So unless you want them to become extinct, they've been on the list since the 1990s. Unless you want them to become extinct, do not always eat those because they're on the endangered species list. That would be your king salmon, which is, you know, very tasty, very expensive, really good, and, you know, they're all good for you. And the silver salmon is called the coho salmon, okay? So those are on the endangered species list. So you may not want to eat those, or if you do, just eat them very, very rarely because you don't want them to be non-existent. All right? So those are on the endangered species list. Then you have other salmon that are heavily farmed, which would be your Atlantic salmon. If you're going to buy Atlantic salmon in the store, just so you know, there's a 99.9% chance that is a farmed fish, okay? And also your canned pink salmon, too. It's going to be from a farm fish as well, more than likely, okay? So you can buy those, but they're from fish farms. So then those cases, there's certain things you need to look for as well. So your best shot at salmon is actually the sockeye, or it's called the red salmon. It's a Pacific salmon, and it can be wild caught or it can be farmed. But the thing with that is they say they have the very best practices. If it's a farm fish, it's it's very tightly regulated. Those salmon are fed krill, or they eat the krill, which is why they call them red salmon. So it's a very good salmon for you, and it's very safe. So that would be the supreme one that you can look for, the sockeye salmon. And the best brands to get would be the ones coming from Alaska, for both the pink salmon and the sockeye salmon from Alaska, okay? Wild caught from Alaska. If it's coming from a farm, they said it was the countries of Denmark and New Zealand and Maine. Here in the United States, Maine. Denmark, New Zealand, and Maine are the places where you could look for salmon. And they do have a labeling system where the Marine Stewardship Council or the Aquaculture Stewardship Council puts their little stamp of approval on there. It's supposed to be a green check mark on there letting you know that this is a safer salmon for you to eat. So when we're talking fish, there's really 3 terms that you should be familiar with. One is wild caught, one is farm raised, and one is sustained farm raised. Okay, so wild caught is just like what it sounds like. It was caught in the wild. They went out there in their little boat or whatever, and they caught the fish, and they brought a little fish back. So the fish is in its natural habitat, and it's doing what it does. All right, so that's wild caught. Farm raised. Now, that has a potential of being good, but there's a lot of problems that have cropped up with farm raised, and we'll be talking about those in a minute. But what it is a net pen. They call it a net pen that's in the water, where they have closed it off, where they contain all the fish are put in there and collected into that pen, and then they spoon feed them the food they want them to eat. They don't have access to go out and eat their own food or get their own food. They're given the food to eat. And there's also a stream of water that's going through the pens, and the issue that can occur with that is that water, will all the gunk that may eventually be in it, gets washed on out into the natural surroundings. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, because that can be a problem. The sustained farm raised is actually a better system, because they have actual tanks where they have raised the tanks up, and they can even be on land, or they're separated. If they're not on land, then they're separated from the water thing, that the water is separated so that they feed the fish in the tanks, and they filter out the water and dispose of all the gunk and the waste that is in the water, instead of letting it go into the natural habitat. So that's a better system. So you need to kind of know what you're dealing with that. Now, with the farm raised, here are the challenges we're talking about. So if you want to get farm raised fish, you should be looking for that check mark, that green label, or getting them from the wild caught from Alaska, or getting them from Denmark or New Zealand or Maine, okay? Because we have to deal with pollution. You have to deal with the kind of feed that they are feeding these fish. There's some challenges with overstocking, with disease, and with escaped fish that fly the coop. All right, so we'll talk briefly about all of those things regarding pollution. Okay, the waste from the fish, excretions from the fish, is going to come into the water, right? And when they're just farm raised, that water just gets flushed on through into the natural habitat. So all that stuff gets flushed on through with it. And we're talking about antibiotic, chemicals, or whatever they're giving the fish. We're talking about the uneaten feed. If the fish haven't eaten all the feed yet, gets flushed all into the natural habitat as well. We're talking about the fish that could escape and things. So those things that can pollute the surrounding area. And there's something that's called pollution nutrition. What is pollution nutrition? That is when you have all those fish together and they're excreting things, and in the process that they're eating and whatever, and those nutrients that are released out of them are in the water, and if it gets too high of a content, it affects the natural habitat. And what they found that's happening is, I think it's nitrogen that they say that's released, but anyway, it is pulling oxygen out of the water and creating what they call dead zones, areas in the water that are depleted of oxygen to the extent that nothing can grow there anymore and nothing can live there anymore. And they said that they have over 400 dead zones globally across, I think it was 95,000 square feet of ocean where nothing can grow on those, and it's continuing. They said they've gotten a third more increase dead zones than they had a few years back. And so it's increasing because the farms are becoming the mainstay of the fish industry, and it's increasing. Okay, so that's a real biggie there. Feed. Guess what? They don't let the fish go out and get their own food, right? They feed them, and they feed them manufactured, industrialized, processed feed that consists of GMO soy and corn and other plants, and also what they call foraged fish feed. They went out and they caught wild fish, ground it up and turned it into a feed meal, added it with the soy and corn and stuff, and made a mixture for the fish to eat. So they're fishing to give the fish some fish to eat. Okay. They even says to the extent where they are 90% of the foraged fish that they use to feed the fish with, people can eat. Huh? So they're fishing, instead of giving it to you to eat, they're fishing and then giving it to the fish to eat, and then taking the fish that ate it and giving the fish to you. I don't know. So that's what they're doing. And so that's causing a problem with overfishing. They're overfishing, but not overfishing all the time for us, overfishing to feed other fish. Okay, so that's the problem with the feed. Also in the feed, because of overstocking, Same thing, overstocking is when they put a whole bunch of fish in the pen because they have to make a profit. So to make a profit, they got to put enough in there to make a profit. They call it overstocking their pens. And so when they do that, just like on land, when they do that with animals, it breeds disease and all of that. So then they start using antibiotics. They said in the last 7 years, the use of antibiotics in the fish farms has increased 500-fold. And they say a lot of the antibiotics they put in the feed. So they mix it up in the fish's food and give it to the fish. Okay, so when the uneaten feed that's in the water, when it gets flushed through the farms, that stuff is going into the natural habitat. And guess what? The wildlife are eating that. Okay, so they're getting those antibiotics. And also the parasites from diseases and all that stuff. But they're just flushing that water through. It's getting into the environment. So that's a big problem with disease and overstocking and with feed. And then the other thing is escaped fish. And they say that's ongoing, that is still happening, where fish just break out. There's some kind of either break in the net or something doesn't work right and the fish get out of the nets into the natural habitat. They say from 1 to 5% of the fish that are in the net pens escape every year. So you're talking about thousands of fish that are getting out into the natural habitat. And some of them are foreign fish. Unfortunately, the fish they farm are not necessarily native to that area. They've just selected to use them because, like, for example, Atlantic salmon, its native habitat is the Atlantic Ocean, but they have fish farms in Chile, Pacific Ocean, for that. Washington used to have them already. In fact, there was a big escape in 2017, and a lot of people didn't hear about it. I heard about it because I was in school at that time for my nutritional classes, and I heard about it. And 250,000 Atlantic salmon escaped into the Pacific Ocean in Washington. And to Washington's credit, after that happened, they are phasing out having fish farms with foreign fish. All their fish farms have to have Pacific salmon fish in it. They're phasing that out, and they said by 2025 it shall be completely phased out because of this destruction that it caused. Because if a foreign fish comes into a place where it's not its natural habitat, it upsets the apple cart in that area in a lot of different ways. In terms of the eating too much food, a lot of the farm fish are GMO fish. In fact, they said the first harvest Atlantic salmon GMO was in 2020. And what they have done with them is they've made them so that they grow faster. Okay, so they can make more money. And in the process of doing that, they eat more. And so if you get those released into the ocean, the natural habitat, they're going to be eating up everything from everybody else. Okay, so you're upsetting things. They're talking disease, pollution, all those kind of things that are happening because the fish are escaping. So that's a problem too with farm fishing. So that's why sustained farmed raised fish is a better option because they keep them separate from the natural habitat. So it's really important to kind of know where your fish is coming from. And like I say, look for that green check mark label so you'll know that it's been checked off as being a tightly regulated brand or whatever. Okay, so I want to say a word about shrimp, then I'll stop, because shrimp also is heavily farmed. Half of your shrimp that you're eating is farmed, and 90% of the shrimp that you eat is imported, comes from other countries. And the one thing that what the archives reading was talking about was avoid eating imported shrimp. 90% of us imported. So that means you need to be really selective. Avoid eating imported shrimp because you don't know the regulations under that farming situation, because most of it's been farm raised. Also, it was saying check again for certification labels so you know how safe it is. And then also, if you have a choice, buy frozen shrimp rather than fresh shrimp, because they said fresh shrimp is actually frozen shrimp that they thawed out for you and then call it fresh. So actually the healthier fish would be, and the freshest fish is going to be the fish that you buy that's frozen. Okay, so those are 3 points I wanted to say about the shrimp. But I hope this was helpful to you, especially for those of you that do eat fish, because it's really important that you know the fish that you're eating. Now, if you want some other free tips on brain health and healthy eating, happy to give it to you. My free master classes are coming back up. They're going to be up, I think, start again in about a week or so. So check out my website, keepyourbrainsharp.com. There's a schedule there of when the classes are and the sessions are, and you can come to the Zoom live or have the recording sent to you, if that's what you prefer. Either way, but you have to register so that I will know who to send it to. So I hope some of you attend. Happy to see you. Your brain's destiny is in your hands.